Hey there, we are Josh and Lisa Canning of Persevere Together.
And we help Catholic couples navigate mental illness in their marriage.
Today we're talking about understanding and supporting a spouse with depression, anxiety, or other mental illness. And what we really want to offer you is some resources if you're just maybe experiencing this for the first time, wondering what's going on, what are the next steps. That's what we're going to be talking about in today's video.
This is a topic that we have explored on and off for the last, I would say, 10 years of our marriage?
Yep.
Talking about it quite publicly. And there was a period in time where we created several videos really diving into this topic. And then for whatever reason, life, 10 children, for whatever reason, we didn't create as much intentional content on this exact topic. And so today's video is a resurgence, will you say?
There we go.
We are regenerating. We are remaking new. We are creating new content on this topic that we have as a couple navigated together for about 10 years.
Sure.
So very briefly, we'll share with you our story of how mental illness came in. If you want to hear a longer version of it, you can go to some of the videos that we will link wherever you're watching this. We've been married for 17 years. 17? I always forget. I think it's 17. Almost 17 years. And about 3 or 4 years into our marriage, I started to notice things happening in my husband that were very different than his normal, what I would describe as happy-go-lucky lifestyle. And what we now know is that he was experiencing at first probably just extreme anxiety, like clinical anxiety, but then that snowballed into a full-out depression.
Yep. So I was working in a church ministry job at the time. We had 2 kids and one on the way. And to my mind, there wasn't too much that I should be struggling with, really. I mean, there's job stress. And to be honest, the more I reflect on that, the more I realized that was playing a role. But while I could understand and acknowledge job stress, what I didn't understand is what came after that, which is essentially a kind of a loss of interest in doing anything, very, very low moods, a lot of difficulty sleeping, inability to truly kind of just wind down. And eventually, to be honest, kind of a despair, really thinking that there's nothing to look forward to in life. I was 30 years old, and I basically was starting to believe that everything that was good in my life or the best part of my life was behind me. And then everything forward was just bleak. And eventually came to struggle with even the process of getting out of bed, took some time off work, and basically acknowledged that I was in a clinical depression. Now, if this sounds familiar, maybe you've observed some of these things in your spouse or in yourself. That may be what is at play. And we're going to talk a little bit about how you can do an assessment or encourage your spouse in doing a bit of a self-assessment if they're not at the point of wanting to go and seek counseling yet. That can be a struggle for a lot of people. But if they haven't confronted or aren't willing to acknowledge it yet, we're going to give some tips on that.
That's what began our now 14 years. If that happened right around, like John was about 4 years old. So about 14-ish year journey with navigating this with intention. And so we started Persevere Together because there are a lot of resources for the person who might have the clinical diagnosis. But we found, especially when I, as a young mom of small kids, especially at that time, I found there weren't that many resources for the person who was supporting the spouse. And so we want to offer in this video a few tools and tips on understanding and supporting a spouse with mental illness. Okay, where do we begin, Josh? How do we understand depression, anxiety, and other mental health issues?
That's a really great question, because the reality is it can manifest in different ways for different people. And I guess I should give a caveat at the start. We're not therapists or psychologists. We're regular lay people who have experienced this. I've been to a lot of therapy, so has Lisa. And I've learned through that process some of the things that psychologists or therapists are looking for. But let's just say in broad strokes, depression can manifest as a deep sadness that is persistent and beyond what is perhaps normal for the person. It can manifest in difficulties sleeping. It can manifest in really pessimistic thoughts, loss of sort of hope, loss of interest in things that you used to really care about. For me, one might say it was almost an inability to laugh. So just really down, and it can go to even more dark places, such as like the loss of will to live. I'd like to pull up a self-assessment questionnaire that my psychiatrist had me do when I was experiencing depression, and just go over some of the questions. We'll link it below, but it'll ask you to kind of identify to what degree you're experiencing certain things. So, for example, number one, little interest or pleasure in doing things. One might say, does that identify me? Not at all, several days, more than half the days, or nearly every day. Feeling down, depressed, hopeless. Not at all, several days, more than half the days, nearly every day. Trouble falling or staying asleep, or sleeping too much, and so on and so forth. Poor appetite, overeating, feeling bad about yourself, that you're a failure, or you've let yourself and your family down. Trouble concentrating on things such as reading a newspaper or watching television. That's something that's kind of a surprise, but that fog, that persistent fog, is one of those symptoms. Moving or speaking slowly, that other people have noticed. Thoughts that you would be better off dead or hurting yourself. And I realize this is like heavy stuff, but this is what a psychiatrist may help you to assess the level of depression if you're experiencing it, whether it's mild, moderate, severe, or whether you're experiencing depression at all. Now, if you have a spouse who perhaps is highly averse to going and seeking help, they might do this online questionnaire to get a little bit of insight themselves of where things are at,
Yeah. And for the person supporting, for the spouse supporting, these questions are really great to have in your back pocket because you can start to make observations. That's what happened to me. I just noticed a decline in my husband's personality, to be honest. Like, I just noticed that a vibrancy and a joy that used to be very present and very stable started to rapidly decline. His temper would get quicker or shorter. Lack of ability to get out of bed. These questions would have been really helpful for me to be like, oh, this isn't just like laziness or a lack of interest in the family. This is something clinically a challenge at this given moment. And so to have a tool like an assessment can be a very good first step for awareness for the spouse that's supporting, but then obviously for diagnosis for the spouse who has the challenge.
One of the complicating things, so we mentioned anxiety as well. That's something a lot of people experience. And sometimes you're not really sure which is the chicken or the egg, which came first, because anxiety is can be a symptom of depression. It can also be its own thing. And perhaps the depression comes later. But anxiety, I don't know. I'm in layman's terms, I'm just expressing like that. To me, anxiety represents fear, this constant worry, and for me, like it might be in the case of something I can't figure out at work. It's really important, and I can't solve this problem. Maybe I'm not being given the tools to solve the problem. Maybe I'm not being asked to solve the problem, but it's keeping me up at night, and I'm starting to feel kind of fearful. What if we can't figure this out? What if I can't do this thing? Or what if I don't have the energy to be at my best for my family? Or what if I don't? And so that's kind of, I think, for me, that's how I experience anxiety. If you've experienced anxiety, I'd love to hear in the comments, how do you perceive it? But for me, I would connect it with fear and worry. Whereas the depression would be more sort of the loss of motivation towards all things and the feeling of utter sort of like meaninglessness or hopeness towards other things.
So when we have an understanding that mental health is health, the same way that when you break your arm, you need to go get a cast and you're modifying your activities for a period, the same thing is true when you get a sense that your spouse might be going through something clinical and not just a bad mood or not just like I didn't sleep well and so I'm grumpy, right? So this awareness and understanding that mental health is health is the very first step. What do we do once a spouse might be like, hey, I think my husband's going through something, not just a bad day. What do we do next?
Now we're getting into tips. And I think one of the things we want to try to do is invite through questions a deeper self-reflection. So I didn't know that I was experiencing depression, to be honest, until I heard some observations from people close to me. One of my friends, we went out for a beer and he said, you don't seem as happy at your new job compared to your old job. And that was something that really left me challenged to say, like, there's something visible to others that maybe I'm not completely aware of myself. So I would say, approaching your spouse, you might want to just encourage open and honest communication. Sit down with them, find a place where you're away from the kids, where you can just ask, like, how have you been feeling lately? How do you feel about work? How do you feel about our family life, the pace of things? Just feel free to just share, like, what do they call it? Like a truth serum kind of thing. Just feel free to be open.
And here's what not to do, if I may. So my formal training is life coaching, and a lot of the basis of life coaching has roots in cognitive behavioral therapy. So where you are examining your thoughts and the emotions that they create, and then the actions that they produce. What not to do is try to control everything. Okay, so my choleric temperament, I can be very like, we are going to fix this. We're going to do this now. We are going to just come up with 5 steps, a strategic plan. That intensity did not help my spouse. Would you agree?
I would agree.
Did it help back then, and does it help now?
The answer to both is no. No, it didn't help.
So as the spouse supporting, you might have to learn and become very self-aware yourself that your natural tendency may actually be causing more intensity that will not help your spouse. Mm-hmm. And so just to give yourself, the same self-awareness questions, like, what am I doing in my behavior, in my attitudes, in the words I'm saying, in the words I'm not saying? Am I contributing to a space for exploration and curiosity? Or am I just trying to fix everything and get on with life? And here's the challenge when you've got small kids, and many of you watching this, we've got 10 kids. Many of you here watching this, I'm sure, are open to life and are navigating life with a whole bunch of small people in tow. It can be challenging when you've got a bunch of people and you're trying to just live life. So you might be the person in your relationship who does get things done, who does plan the Saturdays, who does get everybody from, swimming lessons to ballet lessons to all the things. But my encouragement is, again, have some self-awareness. Am I contributing to peace and space for honest exploration? And sometimes that will require actual time and space. Mm-hmm. That will actually require, let's book a babysitter. Let's have some time for quiet. Yeah. Let's have some time for uninterrupted conversation. As a life coach, I do a lot of work with the temperaments, right? Choleric, sanguine, melancholic, phlegmatic, if you're not familiar. And while it's not like more melancholics or depressed, I don't want to sort of label it like that, and because that's just not accurate. Anybody can have a mental illness, right? It doesn't matter. But when we can become aware of an ideal condition from your temperament, so just a very brief example, I have an ideal condition of I love for things to be fun. I could go all day, every day with noise and activity and friends and parties and things and whatnot. But for Josh, his temperament, his melancholic temperament, he has an ideal condition of literal silence. It is literally opposite. Now, does it mean that we can't coexist happily and have a wonderful marriage? Of course not. But if I'm not aware that this is something my husband needs to thrive, regardless if you have mental illness in your marriage or not, there's going to be tension, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's so important at this juncture, as you're making space and asking these questions, that you're aware of your own tendencies and perhaps your own biases, or just, again, growth in virtue is going to be really important for both spouses. Mm-hmm. And I'm just going to be very honest. It's going to be on the spouse. It often is on the spouse, or it can be on the spouse who is supporting, to really, really pull up those virtue, like bootstraps, so to speak, where you're I am used to just doing this a different way, but I'm going to grow in virtue and be a bit more quiet, be a bit more peaceful in my approach. And that was a massive thing that I had to learn as the partner supporting.
Yeah, and we're speaking in some depth on this first point, encouraging open and honest communication. But I think it's important that I'm just going to say it like this can be a little bit uncomfortable in that maybe there is some thinking out loud that has to happen. We experience it at different times in our marriage. These kinds of go out on a date, talk about something, and realize we have very different views about where things are at currently in our life. And Lisa just hit on it a little bit. Lisa might be feeling like she's riding high and everything's going hunky dory because of busyness of work and family pace and these things. Whereas for me, I was feeling like this is unsustainable. Like I can't keep going at this pace. Like I really need to bake in more time for personal time and reflection and whatever. So I guess I just say that as a caveat, or not a caveat, but a consideration for if you're inviting this open and honest communication. There may be things that are hard not to take personally. So, for example, like in our case, the spouse might say, I can't handle the pace of our family, the pace of life. This is way, way too much for me. And you might feel criticized in that moment. I guess I would just say, gird your loins a little bit that when we invite open communication, it might feel like a bit of a deluge of different thoughts and feelings coming out. And it's probably a good thing as long as it's not, personal attacks and blaming, but it might feel like that. So just sort of be aware.
And this is what brings us to our next very practical point, and that is understanding what mental illness is. So once we have gained some awareness and we've created some open and honest space for conversation, now I believe it's very much on the agency of both parties to just understand what mental illness is. Mm-hmm. And so an internet search. And perhaps if that's not helpful to you because it's a bit scary, that's okay. Maybe talk to somebody you know in your life that has experienced depression or anxiety, but to just get a baseline cursory understanding. Our brain has neuropathways, and those neuropathways fire and create different reactions. I am not a clinical psychologist, but my understanding of the brain is that when someone has a mental illness, there might be an overemphasis on a pattern, like on one pattern. So for example, I have a trigger, the child spilled my coffee, life is out of control, I'm always going to be out of control, so on and so forth. And this is a very ingrained groove in the brain, right? That's just one very simple example. But my point is, understand what happens when one is mentally ill. Understand it from just a purely scientific point of view. Mm-hmm. And where this can be so helpful is then again, empathy, as well as not taking things so seriously. Josh just brought up that example. What was the example you just said? You said like, my life is unsustainable, right?
Yeah.
I have had to learn, and this still comes up for us. Josh will still sometimes say, our life is unsustainable. I can reflexively take that so personally. Like that is so my temperament to take every criticism, like the smallest criticism, like, oh, there's too much salt on the eggs. Like I'll be like, like I just, as my innate, very broken, very prideful reaction to everything. I've had to learn to take something like our life is unsustainable.
Like the pace of our life is unsustainable.
The pace of our life is unsustainable. And pause. So meaning, this is not a personal attack. Even if it is true, you're going to be okay. This might be just how the world looks in this moment to Josh. Like I've had to learn to take that thought and then be able to control how I react. And this is where my life coaching skills, everybody listen, okay? This is where this is so important. You as the spouse supporting have agency on how you react to what your spouse says. It might not feel like it, and I'm not saying it's not hard. Like, I'm not saying it's not hard, but you have the ability to take that statement and just hold it gently for a moment instead of taking it, crushing it, burning it, spinning it back over to them and being mad, because again, like even just that reaction in my body, I just had even just in that funny little thing, a little spike of cortisol. Like I think my blood pressure probably went up just a little bit, like real quick. Whereas, say it again.
Our life feels unsustainable.
Our life seems unsustainable. I hear you saying our life seems unsustainable. Like, that is holding space. Literally. I just took that thought
Mm-hmm.
and I held it. I know it seems weird, like a baby, but I just held it for a moment. It does not have to, even if it's true. So even if there's truth to it and you need to kind of dissect it, talk about it, strategize, even if it's true,
Mm-hmm.
you can take that thought and just hold it for a moment and have a response that is cloaked in virtue as opposed to cloaked in vice, if I can just use that language very simply.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is such an important skill. Like, I actually had to tell myself in the beginning, you don't have to take everything personally. Like, Lisa, this is not the end of the world. You don't have, a grizzly bear chasing you. Like, you're not in peril. Now, again, it can feel like you're in peril because this is your spouse. This is your person. This is your helpmate. This is your partner in all things, in parenting and in intimacy and in just life. Like, so of course it can feel like you're in peril. But what experience has shown me is in the times, and it still happens to me. It happens to me just the other day. I was so mad at something you said. And I, upon reflection, it's because I was taking it so personally. Like, my initial thoughts were, it's always going to be like this. It's always going to be on me to fix it. It's, just very like angry and very self-centered. But I've learned, and this is going to bring me to my next point, which is so important. So stay with me. I've learned that if I can just take it, hold it, even if it hurts, even if it's like so challenging, and just give a bit of space for it, like just to be there and not take it personally, we have much more constructive and better outcomes. And this is why I want to offer this next piece of advice, this very practical tip, and that is for the person supporting to go get a mental health support person yourself. So that could look like a counselor. That could look like a clinical psychologist. That could look like a life coach. That could look like a spiritual director. You want to get somebody who can help you navigate and understand, give you language. Like what I just articulated just a moment ago, again, applies to all human beings. We don't have to take everything that anyone ever says to us personally because we have agency over what we do with other people's thoughts. Like it's just the truth. And that's going to help anybody, regardless if mental illness is in their marriage or not. But particularly when this dynamic is present, if you take everything personally and you just combat, it's not going to produce a fruitful outcome.
Yep, for sure. And I think, and again, we're not saying this is easy. We're just trying to help offer tips in navigating mental illness. Doesn't mean it's easy. Doesn't mean you'll do it right every single time. But if your emotions and reactions to each other, to this thing, are kind of like a powder keg, you're going to have a lot of blow-ups. But like Lisa said, if you're able to kind of take a breath, like they say on Daniel Tiger, when you feel so mad, you got to roar.
Take a deep breath and count to 4. Don't sing that song to your spouse, though. Don't do it in the moment and sing it
with your kids.
Internally take a deep breath and count to 4.
Yeah, but like Lisa said, so for me, from my perspective, there are times when, as we said at the top, my personality isn't, when I'm experiencing depression, my personality isn't what it is when I'm not in depression. And so my reactions are not the same as they are when I'm not in depression. And I know Lisa said this in the past. There are times when I react to something and she says, you know what, that's not Josh talking, that's his depression or his anxiety talking. And there's an element of truth in that. I mean, and that can bring comfort in saying, you know what, they're not reacting to the situation like they should. In reality, our life is sustainable. It just sometimes feels unsustainable. The reality is we're still here. Life has been sustained.
It has been sustained.
but what was articulated is that I need a break. This pace is too much. I need to change. I need something to change. And that's the thing that's trying to get out and trying to be processed.
One of the things that I didn't have awareness of when we created all the videos we did several years ago was understanding of the central nervous system. So when Josh says something like, our life is unsustainable, there is something in his central nervous system. And if you're not aware of what that means, it's literally how our body is wired to handle stress. The central nervous system gets taxed. So when you are around a lot of things that are not ideal for your particular system. So like I said, I can do parties and fun for a long time. Doesn't tax me. Josh gets really drained by a lot of noise, especially a lot of chaotic noise like you might have like at a birthday party or something. And he will get taxed more. And that's just reality. It's not good, not bad.
And that can be even when I'm enjoying if it's like a social gathering that I enjoy, an introvert still expends energy to do that and needs to recover. An extrovert does not. An extrovert is energized by that kind of activity.
And so my point is that this is another tip for you. Becoming knowledgeable about things like your central nervous system. This is not some woo-woo garbage, okay? Your central nervous system is a God-given part of your design. And there are things that you can do like breathing, putting your hand on your heart and breathing to try to regulate your central nervous system to tell your body, I'm not currently being chased by a grizzly bear. There's things like, I do this and Josh is like, you're so weird right now, but you can literally move your body so that cortisol is kind of getting broken up, like you're getting rid of some of that pent up negative energy that's currently in your body, because we are corporeal people. We live and breathe. We are like tactile, right? It is our bodies, our reality. And so knowledge of the central nervous system is so important. And so I'm going to go back to my tip about finding your own care as a spouse who's supporting. What can be really helpful with that, if you're already doing research for your own care, is that it might be easy then to extend the invitation to your spouse. Mm-hmm. Hey, Josh, I've just found a great counselor. I heard that they have openings in their clinic. Would you be interested in meeting with somebody? Here's the phone number. I'm going Monday at 5. Do you want to just schedule an appointment right after? Whatever,
right. Yep. And from past comments and other videos we've done, I realize this is something that the spouse experiencing mental illness may not be open to. So it may be useful to ask them what they would like to do. If they acknowledge there is something going on, how would you like to proactively address this, and not necessarily box them into one possibility. Maybe there's a possibility of talking to the family doctor first. Maybe it is joining some sort of a group counseling thing, or just look at what options there might be, perhaps that fall short of what they're dreading, which is maybe like, I'm going to have to see a psychiatrist and get on medication. That may be the case. Who knows? But perhaps you can encourage them to think about what to do and offer suggestions in a non kind of directive way. This is what you got to do. This is how we're going to fix this thing.
Yeah, don't be intense. Okay, if your tendency is to be intense, don't be intense. And again, that might take learning on your end. That might take awareness on your end. And that's why it's so great for you as a supporter. If I could do anything over again, I would have gotten some kind of clinical mental health or life coach, somebody especially with experience navigating mental illness. I would have sought out help from somebody a little bit more regularly at the very beginning.
So if I can just summarize the points we've talked about in this video, for simplicity's sake, we talked about encouraging open and honest communication and creating kind of a safe space to talk about this with your spouse. Maybe it's on a date, but somewhere where you can at least have some quiet and some time to educate yourself about their specific mental health condition or what you think it might be. Whether it's been diagnosed or not, to try to understand when it's flaring up and how it's impacting your relationship. Offering emotional support, being patient, and understanding that this is a journey. It's not an overnight process. It's not something you can just kind of flip a switch and fix. Helping your spouse to find professional help if needed. And of course, taking care of yourself and getting the help that you need so that you're set up in a good place for your own well-being, your own mental health, and in a good place to also kind of journey with your spouse in this. This is what we talk about at Persevere Together. We really want to see marriages thrive despite the particular crosses that God gives them. We want you to all have hope and believe that that there is possibility to make small changes that have real lasting impacts, and that you can get through this together, and that all things work together for good for those who love God and are called according to his purpose. So
in the past, all of our videos were one-sided, meaning we created content and then we offered them to the world. But we didn't really offer an opportunity for people to engage back except for in the comments. And so we are delighted to share that we have started a Locals community. Locals is a platform where we can now talk back and forth, engage a lot more, be live with you. We would like to offer, and if there's interest, please write this in the comments, but we'd love to offer an opportunity to coach live, where I can put on my life coaching hat and offer that kind of space for actual interaction. And so join us inside Locals. This is something that people have been asking for a really long time. Like, where is the private support group for Catholic couples? And so we want this to be a place where we can all just be honest and be compassionate and be supportive of each other. So join us via the link. We'll put it right below this video and join our community.